Mansour sacrificed. The question is, would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's culture today, many people don't think the story's true. They think it's invented. After all, it was written down by religious people. We know religious people try to embellish things. And it's got miracles in it. A resurrection's a miracle. We don't believe in miracles anymore. How many people have seen somebody rise from the dead? I haven't. So why would we believe such a story? Well, I actually think it's quite easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions in the affirmative to show that it's true. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Now that is some pretty grooving music, isn't it? Yeah. That's actually from our TV show, which is on Wednesday nights right now. So it's not live, as you can see. It's on DirecTV channel 378. It's also on Roku. Look for NRB TV, or it's streamed on our website or on our app. We're also on radio every Saturday mornings. Here it'd be 9 a.m. in the Central Time Zone, but if you're a college student, I know on Saturday you don't get up till the crack of noon, so forget that. That's okay. It's podcasted. It's called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. What we do is we present evidence for Christianity there, and we cross-examine ideas against it based on our website, crossexamine.org. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. And by the way, it's going to serve as our outline here tonight. The first question, does truth exist? Why is that important? Because you hear people saying there's no truth. You got your truth. I got my truth. All truth is relative, right? You've heard these claims. Well, if there's no truth, Christianity can't be true. Of course, if there's no truth, atheism can't be true either, right? In fact, if there was no truth, why would you be here at university? What are you here to learn, right? Supposedly, you're here to learn truth, right? Of course there's truth. We're going to deal with that first. Second question, does God exist? Why is that important? Because obviously Christianity can't be true if there's no God. I hope to show you tonight through 3 arguments that there really is a theistic God. That's a spaceless, timeless, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things to this very moment. These 3 arguments are mentioned in the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know them. In fact, we're going to try and establish point 2 without any reference to any religious document, okay? Third question, are miracles possible? Obviously, that's important. We just mentioned a resurrection. If miracles are not possible, Christianity can't be true. But I hope to show you tonight that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and even atheists are admitting the data for this miracle. We'll see that here tonight. Then we're going to get to the key question, is the New Testament true? The New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists, if God exists, if miracles are possible, then we're going to see if the documents are reliable enough. They don't have to be inerrant for this to be true. Are they just historically reliable enough to let us know that Jesus rose from the dead? Because if Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity's true. Of course, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, game over, it's false. In fact, Paul, the great apostle, wrote to the people at Corinth, if Jesus has risen from the dead, your faith is in vain. From that point, you can show that the whole Bible's true. How? Why? Because if Jesus rose from the dead, then he's God, and whatever God teaches is true. Jesus taught the entire Old Testament as the Word of God, and he promised the New Testament. And you say, why trust Jesus? Look, I just have a personal policy. If somebody rises from the dead, I just trust whatever the guy says, okay? Now, we don't have time to go through this in any great detail. We're going to spend most of our time tonight on point 2, but we'll touch on the others as well. So if you want to go further, I want you to text the word evidence to this number, 855-909-0582. If you text the word evidence to that number, I'm going to send you the entire PowerPoint presentation in a PDF format. In fact, more slides than I can show you tonight, so you can look at it at your leisure. Okay, just text the word evidence to 855-909-0582, and I'll put this up at the end. We also have some books and DVDs out there if you want to get that so you can go deeper. And I want to point out that all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. Okay? Just now. I got 3 sons, so I need some help. All right? Anyway, what we're going to do here is we're going to start right here at point 1. Does truth exist? Are you guys ready to go? Bearcats, are you ready to go? Yeah. All right. All right, whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand and he said to him, "Colonel, I want the truth." And Nicholson said, "You can't handle the truth." Bearcats, if he said it that way, the movie would have gone nowhere. You can't handle. That's not how he said it. Here's how he said it.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
All right, let's try that again. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Now that felt better, didn't it? We could all go home right now. That was worth coming just to say that, right? Don't you want to say that to people sometimes? You can't handle the truth. Well, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. Well, if you don't get anything outside of what we talk about here tonight, this is going to be the most important thinking skill we're going to talk about. And I don't care if you're an atheist or a Christian or anywhere in between, this is going to be worth knowing. This is the most important thinking skill. I was 33 years old, I already had a master's degree, and I didn't know this, to show you what a dimwit I was. And this thinking skill is so powerful and so simple that once you get your mind around it, you're going to go, wow. This is going to save me a lot of time and effort. Here's the thinking skill. I'll show it to you by using it. Suppose somebody comes up to you and says there is no truth. You should ask that person a question. What should the question be? Yeah, if somebody says there's no truth, you want to say, hey, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? This is known as a self-defeating statement. What's a self-defeating statement? A self-defeating statement doesn't meet its own standard. It violates the law of non-contradiction, a fundamental law of all logic. It would be like me saying I can't speak a word in English. What would you say? Hey man, you're using English to say it. Or it'd be like me saying my parents had no kids that lived. Or my brother is an only child. Or everything I say is a lie. Some of you will get that tomorrow. Or all generalizations are false. Some of you will never get that one, all right? These are self-defeating statements, and you've got to get good at recognizing self-defeating statements because so much of what we hear about in our defeating, which means it can't be true. It's false. And here's the thinking skill. What you want to do is you want to turn the claim on itself. Turn the claim on itself. So if somebody says there's no truth, you turn the claim on itself and you say, is that true? All right, let's do a few more. Sometimes it's said this way. Sometimes people will say all truth is relative. Somebody says that, and you turn the claim on itself. What question are you going to ask back? Is that a relative truth? No, that's an absolute truth claiming all truth is relative. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Now, sometimes it's not said that way. Today, it's more often said this way. There isn't the truth, only my truth. Right? I've got my truth, you've got your truth. It isn't the truth. Now, if you turn the claim on itself, what might you say back? Simply ask, is that just your truth or the truth? Because if this statement up here is just your truth, then it's just your opinion. Why should I believe it? But if your statement up here is the truth, then it defeats itself because you just got done saying there's no such thing as the truth. You see the problem here? You know what? I know this is going to be unpopular. I'm sorry, but there's no such thing as your truth or my truth. There just is the truth. Now, there may be truths that apply to you and not to me. Maybe your name is Ed or Julie or something, and my name's Frank, right? But it's objectively true that your name is Ed or Julie and my name's Frank, even though that only applies to me. Now, sometimes it isn't even said this way. Sometimes it's said this way. It's true for you, but not for me. You've probably heard people say that. Well, Christianity is true for you, but Buddhism is true for me. If you turn the claim on itself, what are you going to say back? This is the interactive portion of the program. Come on. This is also self-defeating. It's just a little bit more subtle. If somebody says it's true for you but not for me, say, hey, is that true for everybody? Is true for you but not for me true for everybody? Because if true for you but not for me is true for everybody, then true for you but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough. But that's because this is a self-defeating statement. Actually, there's a more fun way of dealing with this. If somebody says it's true for you but not for me, say, sure, go try that with your bank teller. Yeah, go to your bank teller and say, I'd like $100,000 out of my account. The bank teller looks at your account and says, I'm sorry, you only have $6.12 in your account. It's easy to get the money. You simply say, ha, that's true for you but not for me. Give me the 100 grand. Are you going to get the money? No, if it's true there was only $6.12 in your account, that's true for all people at all times in all places when referring to you at that time. It's just true. You know, I go to a lot of churches. I normally ask people, do you think Christianity is true? And most people will say yes. And then I'll ask them why. Do you know what answer I get more than any other? Because I have faith. Is that a good answer? Does your faith change whether or not God exists or Jesus rose from the dead? I mean, do you have to believe something to make it true? Do you have to believe in gravity to stay on the ground? Do people who don't believe in gravity float away? Hey, look, there's another one. Hey, if you believe, you'll come back. No, that's not the way it works. You say, well, why is the Bible talking about faith then? Because there's two kinds of faith. There's belief that, and then there's belief in. Belief that is getting evidence that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead. This is what we call apologetics. Doesn't mean we're saying we're sorry. It comes from a Greek word which means to give a defense. Give evidence that it's true. But all the evidence in the world won't get your moral transgressions forgiven. For that, you got to go from belief that to belief in. You see, there's a difference. In fact, James, the half-brother of Jesus, wrote that little book in the New Testament called, You Guys Are Sharp Tonight. He said even the demons believe that God exists, but they tremble. Do you know that a demon exists better than we do? Why? They're in the spiritual realm. They know it's true, but they don't trust in him. In fact, we know the difference between belief that and belief in relationships, right? When I first met my wife 37 years ago, I got evidence that she would be a good wife, but all the evidence in the world didn't make her my wife. I had to take a step of trust in her to ask her to be my wife. And in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes. That's the difference between belief that and belief in. Belief that is of the head. Belief in is not only of the head, it's of the heart. Look, if you don't want to believe in or trust, that's really the word we ought to use, trust in Jesus, you don't have to. He's not going to force you into heaven against your will. If you don't want him now, you're not going to want him in eternity. Now, most of the time when the Bible's talking about faith, it's talking about the second kind. Believe in, trust in. You know that it's true, trust it. That's the difference. And again, you don't have to do that. You don't have to go from belief that to belief in. You have a free choice to do what you want to do with it. But there's a difference between belief that and belief in. How about this? You hear this a lot. There's no truth in anything but science. What do you say to somebody who says this? Turn the claim on itself. Is that a scientific truth? Can you go in the laboratory and prove that? No, that's a philosophical claim. You can't prove that in the laboratory. In fact, science is built on philosophy. You can't do science without philosophy. In fact, in the book back there, Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case, there's a chapter on science in there. Here's the title of the chapter. Science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. Thank you. That's good. We can go home now. Well, think about this. Why do we have conflicting advice on COVID? People say, follow the science. Which science? Who said? Why do you say science doesn't say anything scientists do? Because all data needs to be gathered, all data needs to be interpreted, and who does that? Scientists do that. Sometimes they have the same data, but they interpret it differently, so they come to different conclusions. Sometimes they have different data, and they interpret it rightly, but they have different data, so they come to different conclusions. Sometimes there's a political agenda. Doesn't matter what the data say. They're going to come to different conclusions because everything needs to be interpreted. So you can't do science without philosophy. And science is built, by the way, reading the Bible is built on philosophy too. Right thinking about reality. You couldn't understand the Bible or even the newspaper without philosophy. Now, if you think about this, the most important things in life have nothing to do with science. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? I don't know. Let's run an experiment. No. How about this? You should doubt everything. This is a skeptical claim. If you turn the claim on itself, you're going to say, should I doubt that? Right? Why are skeptics skeptical of everything but skepticism? You ever notice they don't doubt that? They think it's true. Now, how many people in here, regardless of what you believe, Christian, atheist, anywhere in between, how many people in here sometimes doubt that what you believe is true? Look, if you don't have your hand up right now, you're probably not thinking very much, right? I mean, I've written books on this stuff, and sometimes I wake up in the morning, I go, I don't even know if this is true. You ever do that? But then I start thinking about my doubts, and I realize that most of my doubts are emotional. They're not intellectual. In other words, if I'm having a good day, everything's fine. Bad day, don't know. Good day, fine. Bad day, don't know. Good day, fine. Bad day, don't know. What's changing? Me or the evidence? I'm going up and down. The evidence is staying the same. Don't concentrate on your psychology. Your psychology is not going to tell you whether anything's true. Not just Christianity, but anything else. Concentrate on the evidence. In fact, when people say to me, Frank, I used to be a Christian, but I lost my faith. I don't mean to be unkind, but since I'm originally from New Jersey, sometimes I am. When they say that, I want to say, when they say I lost my faith, I want to say, so? So? Are you telling me because your psychology changed that God has somehow popped out of existence? Are you telling me that because your psychology changed, Jesus hasn't risen from the dead? Again, your psychology isn't going to tell you whether something's true outside of your skull. The evidence will. So don't concentrate on your psychology, concentrate on the evidence. And I think if you look at the evidence, you're going to realize the evidence for Christianity is very strong, and therefore you ought to believe it. And what you ought to do is start doubting your doubts, because if you start doubting your doubts, then you're back to knowing something for sure. Have you guys ever thought about doubting your doubts? I doubt it. Oh, this is the granddaddy of them all. You ought not judge. Christians. Jesus said, don't judge. Why are you judging? Stop judging. All right, forget about Jesus for just a second. Logically, what's the problem with this? Yeah, somebody says you ought not judge. You're going to say, hey, isn't that a judgment? Or you might say to them, then why are you judging me for judging? You say, wait a minute. Jesus said don't judge. Nope, never said it. Sure he did. He said it in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. All right, I know this is going to sound a little weird for a minute, but it's true. There are no verses in the Bible. You think when Matthew was writing his biography that we call a gospel, he said, here's chapter 7, verse 1? No. When were the chapter and verse divisions put in? Like 500 years ago to help us navigate the text, which is a good thing, right? It'd be really hard to find your way around this huge book without numbers. Imagine you go to church one Sunday and the pastor says, why don't you go about 2/3 of the way in? Let's see if we can find the same spot. No, that's not going to work, right? You need numbers. The problem is, if it's got a number in front of it, we think that we can take that out and make it say whatever we want. Jesus didn't stop at Matthew 7:1. Here's what he said. Judge not, lest you be judged by the same standard you judge others. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, you hypocrite, which is a judgment, by the way. Take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. Is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It's actually a command on how to judge. Don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem, fix it, then go help your brother. But it would be completely ridiculous to say don't make judgments. Why? Number one, it's a judgment itself. And number two, you'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. You made 100 judgments tonight just getting over here. And now you're going, was this a good judgment? This guy's kind of crazy. You're making judgments between good and bad, right and wrong, safe choices from dangerous choices. Everybody makes judgments. Atheists make judgments. What judgments do they make? There's no God. Jesus didn't rise from the dead. Bible's not telling the truth. There's no meaning to life. When you die, you're going to become worm food. Have a nice day. That's it. Everybody's making judgments. The only question is, are your judgments true? I will say this. Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? Pharisees. And who were the Pharisees? They were the religious and political leaders of Israel. Many of them were on the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, to whom Rome delegated a lot of the day-to-day legal authority and political authority to them. They were the politicians and the religious leaders of Israel, and Jesus went after these people. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And he wasn't so nice doing it. In fact, if you think Jesus was a sweet guy who's never said a bad word about anyone, you have not read John chapter 2, John chapter 8, or Matthew chapter 23. What happens in John chapter 2? Jesus makes a whip and he goes and he jacks people up in the temple. Sweet and gentle Jesus, yes! And then in John chapter 8, he's having an argument with these same Pharisees. And right in the middle of the argument, he stops and he says, "Your father is the devil." Jesus, you can't say that. That's not very Christ-like. Excuse me, I am Christ. Can you imagine you're having an argument with somebody and you stop and you go, "Your father is the devil." Don't try that with a sibling, by the way. Okay? And then in Matthew 23, to these same Pharisees, what does he say? "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make them a convert, you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell?" What? Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes, Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No! I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother and daughter, father and son. Jesus was tough. Don't buy into the cultural view of Jesus. Read the documents for yourself. In fact, why was Jesus killed? Number one, because he claimed to be God, which was blasphemy to the Jews and sedition to the Romans. And number two, because he spoke truth to power, particularly the temple authorities, who knew that if Jesus succeeded, they were out of a job. In fact, Caiaphas, the high priest, knew Jesus had resurrected Lazarus from the dead. And what did he say? It's better that one innocent man die, Jesus, than the whole nation perish. He knew intellectually this guy had to be the Messiah, but he still wanted to kill him. By the way, I've noticed one other thing about judging. You ever notice that when you compliment somebody, which is a judgment, nobody gets upset? You know, if you say to your friend, "I really love you. You're such a wonderful person. I wish I could be like you." You think your friend's going to say, "Well, who are you to judge?" Right. Your friend's never going to say that. I've noticed that people don't have a problem with judging. They just have a problem with judgments they don't like. In fact, if you tell somebody something that's true and they get mad at you, you just helped convict them. As Augustine said, we love the truth when it enlightens us. We hate the truth when it convicts us. For you military people in here, by the way, I was in the Navy many years ago, which stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself. Okay? And I got two sons in the Air Force. But for you military people in here, you always get more flack when you're over the target. If people are shooting back at you after you mention some truth to them, you're over the target. They don't want their evil deeds exposed, and you're exposing them. Jesus said, "Men love darkness rather than light." We want to suppress the truth and go our own way. Now, we could talk a lot more about these self-defeating statements, but we got to move on. The main point I want to make is, can everybody see that this statement right here shoots itself? Can everybody see that? So do all the other statements we've been through. All truth is relative. There's no the truth, only my truth. True for you, but not for me. No, yeah, all truth comes from science. You should doubt everything. You ought not judge. They're all self-defeating, which means truth does exist, and that's good because you're paying a lot of money for the truth you're getting here at this school, right? Truth does exist, and relativism and postmodernism are false. Why? Because they claim it's true that there's no truth. Now, one other thing about this. Truth does exist, but you can suppress it if you want. In fact, thank you for coming, especially if you're not a Christian. A little bit later, we're going to have a Q&A, but I want to warn you about something that I might ask you, particularly if you're not a Christian. It's not fair for me to ask you a question without me warning you that I'm going to ask you this question. Here's the question I might ask you if you're not a Christian. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at the microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no! No. How's that reasonable? How's that rational? It's not. The problem isn't here. The problem's here. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God of their own lives. They're not on a truth quest. They're on a happiness quest. And they're just going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. Here's the problem. You can make yourself happy doing a lot of fun things over the short term, but over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone in here who's over 40 knows what I'm talking about because many of us have tried it ourselves. You want to get contentment? Go straight through truth, and it turns out that Jesus is the truth. So think about that question. If Christianity were true, or let me put it a different way. If Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God, would you follow him? Ask yourself that. If the answer is no, the problem's not intellectual. It doesn't matter how much evidence somebody gives you. You're going to say no because you want to go your own way. Now, this sword cuts both ways because a lot of Christians in here, if I were to ask you if Christianity were false, would you stop believing it? You'd say nope. Right? The question is, are you committed to follow truth wherever it leads? That's the question. So, truth does exist. The next question is it true that God exists? And we're going to spend most of our time here. First, I'm going to point out the three arguments that I mentioned to you that we're going to try and demonstrate that God does exist. The first is the argument from the beginning of the universe known as the cosmological argument. Now, cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says if the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And it says if there's design in the universe and design in life, there must be a designer. Now, these two arguments have some scientific evidence behind it. We'll see it here in a few minutes. The third argument doesn't have any science behind it. It's more philosophical in nature. But it's the argument we've all known since we were very small children. And it's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity, everything's just a matter of opinion. That's just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion, or your opinion against Hitler's opinion. Well, we know that torturing babies isn't just a matter of opinion. It's really wrong. If it's really wrong, there must be a standard outside of us that's really right, and we're obligated to obey. That standard is God's nature. We'll get to that later. We've got to start right here, however, at point 1. Now, you got to admit it was worth coming here tonight just to see God do that. Right? Now, some of you are going, look, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. Now, this is the argument many say points back to the big. Now, I know there's some Christians in here going, Frank, you know, we're Christians here, and we don't believe in the Big Bang. Don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good, for the beginning of the universe is so good, that even atheistic scientists are admitting it. Stephen Hawking, who was the top physicist in the world until he died about 4 years ago. Those of you may know, Hawking had ALS, which normally kills people in a couple of years. Somehow, Hawking had it for more than 40 years. Kind of a medical miracle. Anyway, here's what he said about this. He said, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tried to come up with another explanation other than God. He failed, but he's admitting the data, that space, time, and matter literally came into existence out of nothing. Now, it's not just Hawking who said this. He's saying almost everyone believes this. This is an agnostic astronomer from Tufts University, Alexander Vilenkin, who said this in his book, Many Worlds in One. He said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists, and by the way, a cosmologist is not someone that puts on your makeup. All right? Cosmologist studies the universe. Cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Two interesting words in this quote. The first is proof. Why is that word used here? Usually science is tentative, so why would a scientist use the word proof? Vilenkin sees so many lines of evidence converging on one fact, that the universe had a beginning, that he's saying this constitutes a proof. Also, the word problem. Why is it a problem? Because if space, time, and matter had a beginning, what could have caused that? It can't be something inside of space, time, and matter. If nature had a beginning, whatever created nature must be outside of nature. Must be something we would call supernature. Super means beyond, like we say Superman is beyond the man, right? That has implications we'll get to here in a minute. Now, we don't have time to look at the evidence for this. Why? Number one, we don't have time. We're not going to spend any time on it. Number two, it's all in the book, chapter 3. And number three, it's controversial, even atheist. I want to jump to the bottom line. Here's the bottom line. Okay, if it had a beginning, it seems it must have had a beginner. We've got two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing, or that someone created something out of nothing? What do you think? Someone. I was at Texas A&M 10, 15 years ago, and some atheist said, I think number one is more reasonable. I said, time out. Let's look at number two for a second. Number two says someone created something out of nothing. Now, that's a miracle, right? But at least you got a miracle worker. You got someone. Number one is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. In fact, I said to the audience at Texas A&M that night, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality. And by the way, law of causality doesn't say everything has a cause. Law of causality says everything that comes to be has a cause. There has to be an uncaused first cause. It's either the universe or something outside the universe. Something has to have always existed, otherwise nothing would exist. The only question is, what is the uncaused first cause? So I said to the audience at A&M that night, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality, that things don't pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause. There is nobody here in this auditorium tonight who is currently worried that as you sit here, a hippopotamus has appeared out of nothing, by nothing, in your dorm room and is currently pooping on your pillow. Right? You don't worry about that, right? You're not worried that a raging Bengal tiger is just going to appear in this aisle here and start devouring people. Why? Because you know that things don't pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause. And if the whole universe could do so, why doesn't everything do so? Why don't Teslas pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? You wake up one morning, you look in your driveway, your Hyundai is a Tesla. How do I charge this thing, right? Why don't MacBook Pros pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? Could have saved me $4 grand. If you're hungry after this and you want to have a pizza, does it make sense to order one? Or should you just sit in your room, wait, and hope one pops into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? It seems to me the atheists have all the faith. In fact, do you realize that everyone believes in at least one miracle? Christians believe in a lot of miracles, and certainly this one. But atheists believe, at least some of them do, that no one created something out of nothing. Which takes more faith? That someone created something out of nothing, or that no one created something out of nothing? In fact, here's a question to ask an atheist. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? In other words, if there is no God, why does anything exist? That's a hard question to answer if there is no God. Now think about this, ladies and gentlemen. As everyone seems to admit, space, time, and matter had a beginning out of nothing. What is nothing? Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said nothing is what rocks dream about. Okay? That's nothing. If space, matter, and time had a beginning out of nothing, what could have caused that? The cause had to be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. Also, the being would have to be intelligent to have a mind to make a choice. Ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. You say, well, how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't. Yet. I mean, this could be Allah or some other theistic God. But if we keep going through these questions and we realize that Jesus rose from the dead, then we can conclude that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,988 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. We haven't gotten there yet, but we can see at least 6 attributes of the first cause, which could be the God of the Bible. Next argument is the argument from design. And there's 2 aspects to this. The universe appears to be designed, and you appear to be designed. Life. Let's start with the universe first. In recent decades, scientists have discovered that the universe is fine-tuned. That if you were to change any one of about a dozen of certain factors about our universe, we wouldn't exist, or there would be no universe that could support life. And this goes all the way back to the beginning. Again, Stephen Hawking, an atheist, put it this way. He said if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. If the expansion rate from the beginning was that infinitesimally different, none of us would be here. Now, you can't make any sort of evolutionary explanation for this. Why? Because the expansion rate did not evolve to a particular point by chance. What does that mean? The expansion rate started at the beginning right where it needed to be. This is one of the initial conditions of the universe. It seems to me the same being that created space, time, and matter is the same that fine-tuned the expansion rate to be precisely what it needed to be. Change that slightly, none of the gravitational force, if it were altered by more than 1 in 10 to the 40th power, we wouldn't be here. What's 1 in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that. I know, neither can I, so let me give you an illustration. Take a tape measure and stretch it across the entire known universe. That's a long way. Set the gravitational force at a particular inch mark on that tape measure. I realize gravity's not measured in inches. This is just to give you a scale idea in your mind. If the strength of gravity were different by 1 inch in either direction across the scale as wide as the entire known universe, we wouldn't be here. That's 1 in 10 to the 40 precision. I don't have enough faith to believe that that value landed there by chance. And oh, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is chance a cause? Does chance cause things? Who causes this? Chance. He was just here. No. Chance is not a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. You know when scientists use the word chance, you know what they really mean? We don't know. Look, there's only 2 reasons that value is where it is. Either that value is designed to be there, or it wasn't designed to be there. What makes more sense? Somebody designed it to be right. And I say there's like a dozen of these. Change any one of them, we don't exist. Not only is our universe fine-tuned, our solar system appears to be designed with us in mind. Let's take a look at our solar system here for a minute. Here we are right here, 3rd rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to or a little bit further away, we couldn't survive. A little closer to, a A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it is... That's a lie, it's too cold here in the winter. I can feel it already. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees, change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours, change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us, change that slightly, we don't exist. If Jupiter right here was not in its current orbit, we couldn't exist here on Earth. Why not? Because Jupiter's gravitational force is so strong that it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it rather than us. It's a cosmic vacuum cleaner that protects us. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, you see these dark marks here? Those are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. Saturn does the same thing. In fact, check the planets out here. There you got Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size nation. Take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. Take a look at this. That's Arcturus. That's another star in our galaxy. Here's the sun over here. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size in this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto? Forget about it. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus now. Where's Arcturus? Now. Way over here. That's Antares. That's another star in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Beetlejuice here... Look, I don't name the stars, okay? If the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Beetlejuice would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. And this is just in our galaxy. This is not outside our galaxy. The heavens are awesome. And the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles, and all that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth right now. Now, 30 trillion miles, how far is that? Far. Take you at least 2 tanks of gas on a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. A number of years ago, my wife and I took our 3 sons out to the Desert Museum in Tucson, Arizona. That's where my in-laws lived. If you ever get to go to Tucson, south side of the city, over the mountain range, you go to this museum at night, and if it's a clear night, you can see thousands of stars in the sky. So we're out there this one night many years ago, and the guide says, wow, it's so clear tonight that if we look up at 9:03, we will see the space shuttle in orbit. I said, oh, come on, we're not going to see the space shuttle. It's only 20 feet long. It's 350 miles up. We're not going to see it. Oh, little faith. At 9:03, the guide goes, look! We look up in the sky about 70 degrees above the horizon. There's an object streaking across the western desert sky relative to us about like this. I mean, it's really cooking. When it got right about here, it disappeared. I don't know whether Scotty beamed it up or what. Actually, what happened was, despite the fact that we were in total darkness, the space shuttle was so high up that the sun was still reflecting off of it, and when it got out of the range of the sun, we couldn't see it anymore. Now, when the space shuttle was in orbit, the space shuttle was traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to school in the morning? Take the space shuttle. You'll be 5 miles a second. Think about how fast that is. Well, I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star inside our galaxy, an average distance away, 30 trillion miles. In other words, how long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles if we could go 5 miles per second? How long? A lot. You must be a math major. Okay? Yes. It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star inside our galaxy, an average distance away, you've been going 5 miles a second for 2,000 years, you would be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. We can hardly get out of our solar system. It took us 9 years to get to Pluto. Now, this is just inside our galaxy. How big is the entire universe? The psalmist writes this: "For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those that fear him." Well, how high are the heavens above the earth? The Hubble Space Telescope helped us figure that out. What I'm about to show you is called Hubble Ultra Deep Field. What they did is they trained the Hubble Space Telescope on 1/24 millionth of the sky for several days. What's 1/24 millionth of the sky? Go outside tonight, put a piece of rice on the end of your finger, hold it up. That piece of rice represents about 1/24 millionth of the sky. And I don't know if you can see this, but on this screen here, the bottom down here, these are all mountains. This is the southern hemisphere. And after Hubble trained the scientists trained Hubble on this very small speck in the sky, they put together a little composite video to show you what they found. I'm going to show you this video. This is in the public domain. You can Google it, Hubble Ultra Deep Field. What did they find on 1/24 millionth of the sky? I'm going to start the video. You're going to see the constellations come up in the southern hemisphere, and then Hubble's going to zoom in on 1/24 millionth of the sky. There's no audio. It's just video. Here's Hubble Ultra Deep Field. There are the constellations. Now let's see what's in 1/24 millionth of the sky. What you're looking at are nearly 10,000 galaxies in 1/24 millionth of the sky. And each galaxy supposedly has billions of stars. Now you know why the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God. How many stars are there in the universe? Researchers at the University of Hawaii think they figured it out. The number of stars there are in the universe are about equivalent to the number of sand grains on all the beaches, on all the earth, times 100,000. And to go from one star to another star, just in our galaxy, going 5 miles a second will take you over 200,000 years. Bearcats. I don't ever want to hear anybody on this campus again ever use the word awesome unless you're talking about God or the heavens. Awesome shot, dude. Awesome shirt, dude. Awesome TikTok video. No! What word are you going to say for this? That verse I put up earlier has a second half. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those that fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far as he removed our transgressions from us. If his love exceeds the height of the heavens above the earth, and there's stars equivalent to sand grains on 100,000 Earths, and it's going to take you over 200,000 years just to go between two of those stars, you're getting an idea of what we mean by infinite. And his love is so infinite that he took our punishment on himself. to remove our transgressions from us. Now, does this make you feel insignificant? It shouldn't. Why? Because as amazing as the heavens are, they're not made in the image of God, but you are. In fact, this is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? Human. So here, we just talked about how the universe is designed. Now we're going to talk about how you're designed. In fact, let's go back even further than 11 weeks. Let's go all the way back to when your mother and your father got together to... Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. When your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race. And you won! Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool, but you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.2 billion letter software program we call your genome in that tiny little soldier. All the letters are in the right order. And your mother's egg was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, and it contained the other half of the 3.2 billion letter software program we call your genome. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You know, you have not received any more genetic information from this point till right now. Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, I think it does. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, wait a minute, Frank, you can't legislate morality. All right, no extra charge for this. This comes from our first book, creatively titled Legislating Morality. All laws legislate morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law which doesn't legislate morality. The only question is, whose morality will we legislate? And when people say, well, don't legislate your morality, don't impose your morality on me, I say, why not? Would that be immoral? Because you're imposing your morality on me right now. You're saying I ought not impose ought nots, yet you're imposing this ought not on me right now. Actually, there's a better answer for this. When people say, don't impose your morality on me, this isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government is involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. This isn't your morality. This just happens to be the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said, the Gentiles don't have the law of the law written on their hearts. Everybody already knows this morality, but some people don't like it. Now, if you don't like the morality, you don't have a problem with me. You have a problem with the Creator upon whom this morality is derived. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point till right now, a construction project within you started with astonishing complexity. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second, for most of you anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others lung cells, others heart cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this very minute. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million red blood cells. You just made another 4 million. Knock it off. Are you thinking about this? Are you going, wait a minute, Frank, time out. I got to concentrate. New red blood cells coming. No, this is just happening. How is it happening? Aristotle recognized something 2,400 years ago. Of course, he didn't know anything about blood cells, but he noticed that all of nature was going in a direction. For example, why does an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always go in the direction of becoming an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree or a birch tree or a seahorse? You say, well, it's programmed to become an oak tree. Well, who programmed it? And by the way, is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn in the ground going, all right, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No! Yet it reliably goes in the direction of becoming an oak tree. If it doesn't have a mind of its own, yet it's reliably going in a direction, there must be an external mind directing it toward an end. This is what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. Thomas Aquinas came along in the 1200s AD and said, this is going to be my fifth way to argue for God. That all of nature's going in a direction. There's a target to nature. There's a goal. There's a final cause. Now notice, this argument isn't talking about some kind of Big Bang cause way back when. That's one argument for God. This argument says that every single second of existence, there's a mind sustaining the universe every single second. In fact, God is to the universe what a band is to music. If a band were up here playing the music, the band would be creating and sustaining the music, right? What would happen to the music the second the band stops playing? Music's over. Same thing is true with God. He creates the universe and the natural laws that direct it, and He keeps those natural laws going every single second. He created you, and He keeps you going every single second. This is why the Apostle Paul said, in Jesus we live and move and have our being, and Christ holds all things together. And the writer of Hebrews says, God sustains all things by His powerful word. Now, there's a lot more in the Stealing from God book about this, but we got to move on because we've got another argument for God. You're probably wondering, how's he going to get through all this? The last 2 points go pretty quickly. So let's deal with the moral argument now. And this moral argument points out that there's got to be a standard beyond us. In fact, let me ask you guys a question. How do you know that your team, your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing a pick six? How do you know that? What do you have to know in order to make that judgment? You got to know not just the rules, you got to know the purpose of the game, right? The purpose of the game is to get more points than the other team. And a touchdown gets you that, a pick six doesn't. Without purpose, you can't say that a touchdown's better than a pick six because there's no way to evaluate whether it's a good play or a bad play. In other words, there's got to be a standard outside the game. And notice that in football, the purpose of the game comes from outside the game. In other words, when the players show up down there at Arrowhead Stadium, they don't make up the rules. The rules are already established from outside the game. The field's already ready to go. The commissioner and the owners tweak the rules every year, right? They come from outside the game. Now, the rules of football are arbitrary. They could be different. They could be changed. But the rules of life aren't arbitrary. The rules of life comes from the Supreme Commissioner, God. If there's no God, you can't say there's a right way to live life or a wrong way to live life. Just like if there's no rules or purpose to football, you can't say, and here's a bad play. You need a standard. Now, if there is no God, think about this. The Nazis were not wrong. Why? Because if there's no standard beyond humanity, how can you say the Nazi actions were wrong? They were just following the orders of their government. In fact, when we brought the Nazi criminals in Nuremberg to trial, we said, you've committed war crimes. And they said, we're just following orders. And what did we say back? You had a moral obligation to disobey an immoral order because there's a standard beyond your government and mine. It's called international law. Thomas Jefferson called it nature's law in the Declaration of Independence. C.S. Lewis called it the moral law. But it's the same thing that the Apostle Paul said, the Gentiles are not of the law written on their hearts in Romans chapter 2. It's God's nature. Without God's nature, you can't adjudicate between governments. And if there's no God, love is no better than rape. Not objectively. You might like love better than rape, but it's not objectively better or worse. There's no purpose to life. You can't say that rape is wrong. It's just your opinion. There are no human rights. I know on a college campus we have a very developed sense of justice, which is a good thing, and people are always arguing for rights for this and rights for that. Do you realize if there's no God, there's no rights to anything? There's not only no right to abortion, there's no right to life if there's no God. There's not only no right to same-sex marriage, there's no right to natural marriage. Everything is just a matter of opinion. This is why, in my view, atheists have to steal a standard from God in order to even talk about these things. In fact, racism isn't wrong if there's no God. Slavery isn't wrong if there's no God. Tolerance is no better than intolerance if there's no God. By the way, are Christians commanded to be tolerant? No, that's too weak. Christians aren't commanded to be tolerant. Christians are commanded to love. See, tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. Love says reach out and help them. And how do you help people? Does that mean you approve of everything they do? How many parents do we have in here? Parents. All right. How many former children do we have in here? Okay, good. So this is for everybody. Parents, if you approve of everything your child wants to do, are you loving? No, you're unloving. You have to stand in the way of evil your child wants to do. If you just approve of what they want to do, you're unloving. If you tolerate evil, you're unloving. Love does not require approval. Love requires that you seek what's best for them. Soul famously said this, the 91-year-old economist. He said, when you tell people what they need to hear, you're helping them. When you tell people what they want to hear, you're helping yourself. Why don't we tell people what they need to hear? Because we're afraid we're going to get blowback from them. So what do? We tell them what they want to hear. We get no blowback. We're helping ourselves. We're not really helping them. Also, you can't complain about the problem of evil if there's no God, because if there's no God, there's no such thing as evil. In fact, evil shows God does exist. You say, how can that be, Frank? Well, C.S. Lewis, early on in his life, said that there can't be a good God because there's too much evil in the world. And then one day he had an epiphany and he realized his argument didn't work, and he wrote it in the book Mere Christianity. Here's what he said. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call good unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, you wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. And justice can only exist if God exists. So evil doesn't disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but evil doesn't disprove God, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. In fact, we could look at it another way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In other words, in order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine, right? In order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. So if evil exists, I know this sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. If evil exists, God exists. Not because he's doing evil, but because he is the standard of good by which we'd even know what evil was. He's giving us purpose so we know what's good and what's bad. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what does it mean to submit? Nobody likes this word, submit. We hate it. But let's break it up. Submission. What does mission mean? There's a goal. There's a purpose, right? And sub means you're putting yourself under that goal or purpose. If I'm a diva receiver and I tell the coach, Coach, you got to keep throwing me the ball. The coach is going to say, look, we can't throw you the ball every time. If we do, we're going to lose. We've got to spread the ball around. And if I say, okay, coach, I get it. I'm going to submit my will to your overall will, to the mission of the team. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That's a good thing, right? Look, if God exists, ladies and gentlemen, we would be foolish not to submit our little purpose to his eternal, perfect purpose. We would be foolish. We think we're going to do our own thing when he says, don't go this way, go this way. And we go, oh, but I want to go this way. If this is really true, we would be foolish to go that way, wouldn't we? If there's no God, there's no ultimate purpose. If there is a God, then there is an ultimate purpose and an ultimate future. Now, what can we conclude from these three arguments? We can conclude we have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things and is also moral. Now notice, these are the attributes of the God of the Bible, and yet we haven't even opened the Bible yet. Now again, we don't know if this is the God of the Bible. We'll get to why it is here in a minute. But I got to say one other thing. A lot of people are going, Frank, atheists have arguments against these. No, they really don't, not good ones. In fact, I can't see anything better than C.S. Lewis, so I'm going to say it to you right now. C.S. Lewis points out that atheism makes reason impossible. Check out this quote. It's a 2-slide quote. Track with him. Here's what he says. Suppose there were no intelligence behind the universe. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? You with him so far? But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. Boom. What else can you say? Nobody said things better than C.S. Lewis. Look, basically what he's saying, if atheism, nobody designed our brains, why trust our brains? Well, we can't trust our brains, so somebody must have designed our brains. And if we're just moist robots, as the atheists say we are, if we're just molecular machines, why should we trust anything we think? We're not following the evidence, we're following the laws of physics. Now, tonight, a brand new C.S. Lewis movie is airing in theaters around here somewhere. It's called The Most Reluctant Convert, The Untold Story of C.S. Lewis. My friend Max McLean stars in it, and I happened to see an advanced screening of it the other night. Go see it before the 18th of November, because that's how long it's going to be in theaters. Well worth seeing. And if you go to cslewismovie.com, you'll see where it is in this area. Even if you have to go to Kansas City to watch it. All right? It's well worth seeing. All right, so now, this is not going to take long because number 3 is easy. Are miracles possible? We just pointed out that truth exists, that God exists. Now, how are we going to discover who is the true God? Is it Allah? Is it some other God? Is it the Christian God? God can use miracles to tell us. Now, here's the problem. A lot of people believe miracles are impossible. For example, Noah. Christians, a few Christians in here? Can we just keep this between ourselves? I know this is being streamed right now, but can we all agree that Noah and the ark is crazy? Thank you. And Jesus rising from the dead. How many people in here have seen somebody rise from the dead? Yeah, none of us have. And yet, our entire faith, if you're a Christian, is on you and me believing something none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? What is the deal with Jonah? Can you really believe in Jonah? Now, ladies and gentlemen, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? It's not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is... I got some of you a second time, right? The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible, right? Well, the interesting point here is now the atheists are admitting the data for the first verse. They're saying that space, matter, and time had a beginning out of nothing, and we pointed out that it seems the best explanation is a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent creator who brought it into existence out of nothing. So if Genesis 1:1 is true, every other verse is at least possible, right? I mean, if Genesis 1:1 is true, is it possible that these miracles are true? Of course Noah's crazy, unless God exists. Of course Jonah makes no sense, unless God exists. Of course people don't rise from the dead, unless God exists. It's possible. Now, a lot of people don't believe in miracles because they've never seen one. That's not a good reason to disbelieve something. Why? Because you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. You believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? You're using it right now, I hope. You believe in the laws of logic and the laws of mathematics. Have you ever seen those? Nope, you're using them right now. You believe in justice. Have you ever seen justice? No, you may have seen justice done or not done, but you've never seen a physical thing called justice because it's not something you see. It's an immaterial virtue grounded in the nature of God. You've never seen love. Everyone in here believes in love. In fact, years ago, I had a couple of debates with Christopher Hitchens. You guys remember Christopher Hitchens? He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. And at one of our debates, a student asked him this question, Christopher, what is love? And Hitchens, being a materialist, had to come up with some sort of materialistic answer. So he said, love is a chemical. And I said, don't tell that to your wife. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? Because I got the chemical. Right? I may not have it tomorrow, but I have it today. No, love isn't a chemical. Love is a decision that you make to look out for what's best in the other person. And this virtue is grounded in the nature of God. You've never seen gravity. Oh, Frank, come on. Sure, we see it all the time. That's gravity right there. Nope. You're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. By the way, that's how we know God exists. We don't see him directly. We see him by his effects. And this is what scientists use. They see an effect, and they're trying to reason back to a cause. So creation is an effect. The cause is a creator. Design is an effect. The cause is a designer. A moral law written on your heart is an effect. A cause is a moral law giver. Reason, our ability to reason, is an effect. The cause is a mind. You're reasoning from effect back to cause. That's how you know God exists. If someone asks you, how do you know God exists? You say, I know him by his effects. In fact, you've never seen George Washington. Yet you believe he existed. Why? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by a cause known as George Washington. Same thing is true with Jesus. So you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. And by the way, if miracles do occur, you shouldn't expect to see a lot of them. Why, if any? Because miracles, if they're going to get our attention as special acts of God, have to be rare events. They can't be regular events. I mean, imagine if people rose from the dead routinely. What would the resurrection of Christ mean to us? Nothing. You go to somebody, you go, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle Carl just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. No, it's got to be a rare event. If it happened all the time, you wouldn't believe it. Now, there are spectacular things that happen every day. We don't call them miracles. Why? Because they do happen every day, but I guarantee you there's design behind them. All right, how many people in here have seen your own children born? Every mother should raise their hands. Fathers, you've seen your own child born? When you see your own flesh and blood come out of another human being, you don't go, evolution! Right? You go, this is incredible! There's design behind that. Now, think about it this, last thing on miracles. For atheism to be true, every single spiritual experience and miracle claim in the history of the world has to be false. Is that possible? Yeah, that's possible. Is that reasonable? No. No. Finally, we know the truth exists, that God exists, that miracles are possible, because if God exists, miracles are possible. Now our only question is it true that the central miracle in the New Testament took place, and that is the resurrection of Jesus? Did he really rise from the dead? Now there's like 3 chapters in the book that go into this, so I'm going to be very brief. I'm going to list 8 lines of evidence that they are telling the truth, but we're only going to look at 2 of them. I'll just list them for you. You can get the book to figure out more on them. And they all begin with the letter E. First of all, we have early sources. These documents are written down early, and the source material in the documents goes all the way back to the eyewitnesses, because there's eyewitness details throughout the New Testament documents. Also, there's embarrassing stories. I'll explain that one in a minute, as well as excruciating deaths, because we're going to look at 3 and 4 just a little bit. All right? Number 5, embedded confirmation. I can't explain this briefly, so I'm just going to give you 2 words to Google. Google these 2 words: undesigned coincidences. Undesigned coincidences. When you see this stuff, you're going to go, wow, there's no way these New Testament writers could have invented this. They are independently witnessing the same historical events. I call it embedded confirmation, but look up undesigned coincidences. Also, expected predictions. That deals with Old Testament prophecy. If I only had one Old Testament prophecy to make my case on, it would be Isaiah chapter 53, written 100 years in advance. Extra biblical writers. There are household names like Josephus, Suetonius, Thallus, Phlegon. These people you probably heard of, right? That lived within 150 years of Jesus' life. And when you add up their brief references to Jesus and the apostles, you get a story congruent with the New Testament. Saying the disciples believed Jesus had risen from the dead. These writers aren't saying they believe Jesus risen from the dead. If they were, they'd be Christians. They're saying the disciples had experiences that caused them to believe Jesus had risen from the dead. Finally, the explosive growth of the church out of Jerusalem is really hard to explain unless Jesus rose from the dead. Why? How could you stop Christianity in its tracks, in its infancy? What could you have done? Gone to the tomb and taken out the dead body of Jesus. The Romans wanted that done, and so did the Jews. They couldn't do it. Why? Because the tomb was empty. Jesus was still using his body. But you could have squashed Christianity right then and there if Jesus' tomb was not empty, but it was empty. Now, as I say, we don't have time to get into all these, so let's just take a look at a couple of them. One is embarrassing stories. What are embarrassing stories? Embarrassing stories point this out, that if there's something embarrassing to the author or authors in a text, it's probably true, historians will say. Why? Because you're not going to invent embarrassing things about yourself. You might make yourself look good, but you're not going to make yourself look bad, right? In fact, let me ask you guys a question. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good, and it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people are here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? No, you don't do that. You might lie to make yourself look good, but you're not going to lie to make yourself look bad. Well, the New Testament writers have filled the New Testament. This is in the Old Testament too, but we're just looking at the New Testament. They filled the New Testament with embarrassing details that make them look bad, and even Jesus look bad, that they never would have done this if they were making it up. That's why we call this the dove factor. They're not making this up. Let me just give you a few examples. Peter, their leader, is called Satan by Jesus. Do you think they invented this? Do you think Mark, who wrote this down, at one point said to Pete, "Hey, Peter, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan"? What do you think Peter would have said? "Have him call you Satan. Look, I'm the leader here. This doesn't look good." And then Peter says, "Lord, I'll never deny you." What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. This is not good. And at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away! They all run away. And who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament documents down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? No, if I was there, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I'd write something down like this. Let's see, we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. That sounds pretty good, don't you think? Yep. Peter said, get out. John roundhouse kicked him. Philip said, we'll be back. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say I was Mr. Sissy Pants why the women went down to discover the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses? Forget the fact it's embarrassing to men. That already is embarrassing. But why would you never say that independent of that fact? Because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all four Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were, as embarrassing as it was. I had a lady come up to me once and she said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he got the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I had not thought of that. Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what? Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you the nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner? The story would have gone nowhere if the men were the first witnesses. I can't even believe this next verse is, but it is. Do you know the end of the biography we call the Gospel of Matthew? Matthew has Jesus there giving his disciples the Great Commission. Go, therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers. He says make disciples. There's a difference. And right there, it says of the disciples in Matthew 28, verse 17, it says, some believed, but standing right in front of them, resurrected. And they're doubting. They're going, see that guy over there? Yeah. That guy over there is Jesus. No, I'm telling you, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you, it's him. Jesus is dead. The Romans killed him. It's him. It can't be him. The Romans know how to kill people. They crucified him, put a spear in his side, punctured his heart, blood and water come out. He's dead. It's him. It isn't. It is. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus in there. Jesus has his own family come to seize him and take him home because his own family thinks he's nuts. This is Mark chapter 3. Now you may have heard the scholars say, well, the New Testament writers embellish Jesus to be God. Really? Then why is Mark chapter 3 in there, which is one of the earliest Gospels? In fact, most scholars think it is the earliest Gospel. Also, Jesus is called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. By the way, one of his first witnesses is a formerly demon-possessed woman, Mary Magdalene. Gee, what a great witness, huh? He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And by the way, do you notice there are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline? The Messiah's bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Now, do you think Matthew and Luke, when they were writing the genealogy, said, you know what, I really think we ought to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let's put a couple of prostitutes in there. What do you think? Rahab, Tamar? No! They're not making this up. In fact, there's a lot of shady characters in the bloodline. Judah, from where we get the term Jew, not a good guy. Read about him in Genesis. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us, huh? Bathsheba's in there. In fact, Matthew, when he gets to her name in the genealogy, He won't even mention her name. You know what he says instead? Uriah's wife. Ooh. He's telling the truth. Who is Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could cover up his sin. They're not making this up. This is embarrassing. They're just telling the truth. Now, can you imagine Pharaoh saying, or some historian for the Pharaoh saying, hey, I'm going to pull your genealogy together. We're going to put a couple of prostitutes in there, some evil guys, some adultery your ancestors have done. What would the Pharaoh say to his historian? Off with your head. No, the New Testament writers are telling the truth. As embarrassing as it is, they never would have invented this. And there's many more of these in the book. But we got to move on to one more, and that is excruciating deaths. These men, who were in a position to know whether Jesus had resurrected from the dead or not, died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by simply saying, look, it never happened. Now, it's really important to think about this, that the New Testament writers, all of the New Testament writers, with the exception of Luke, all of them were Jews who thought they were God's chosen people. They followed Yahweh. They had been God's chosen people for at least 2,000 years. So the question is, why would they invent a resurrected Jesus? They didn't think that a man could claim to be God. That would be blasphemy. And they didn't think a man would resurrect in the middle of the time. They thought everyone would resurrect at the end of time, but nobody in the middle. So this was completely out of their paradigm. They're not inventing this. In fact, think about it this way. What did the New Testament writers, who were Jews, have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they get by saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? They got kicked out of the synagogue, and then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. We're going to start a new religion. We are? Yeah. What's it going to get us? First we get kicked out of the synagogue, then beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up. You know, what a great idea. In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. Now, sometimes I get the question, are there any non-Christian writers that talk about this? Yes, I mentioned them briefly a few minutes ago. They're not eyewitnesses, but they're given the same basic story the New Testament gives. But you know what's often underneath that question? An illicit assumption. Here's the illicit assumption. You really can't trust the New Testament writers because, you see, they were biased, they were religious, they embellished things. You can only trust the secular writers on this. If you think about this more than 5 seconds, you'll realize how dumb that objection is. What did these people have to gain by making this up? Nothing. They had everything to lose by making it up, temporally. But they went to their deaths anyway. Now, my friend J. Warner Wallace, a cold case homicide detective you may have seen on Dateline several times, because he's been on Dateline at least 6 times solving murders decades old. And he's written some great books. One is a new one called Person of Interest. Another one is called Cold Case Christianity. And Wallace says that whenever he finds a dead body, whenever he finds somebody he knows has been murdered, he knows that that guy's dead for only 3 reasons, or a combination of these 3. It's not 1,000 reasons, just 3 or a combination. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power. And if you think about that, ladies and gentlemen, that's why we sin today. Sex, money, and power are good things. They're so good, though, we'll take shortcuts to get them. And that's what sin is. So if you're going to say this was some kind of conspiracy, you've got to figure out if one or more of those 3 motivators were in the focus of the New Testament writers. So here's my question. Did the New Testament writers get real popular with the ladies by saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No. Did they get money by saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No, they're not 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Okay? Did they get power by saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No, they got exactly the opposite. Paul had power as a persecutor of the church. As soon as he became a member, he was persecuted himself. So, without those motivators, you can't come up with a conspiracy here. It makes no sense at all to say they made it up. And then why would they die for a known lie? You say, wait a minute, Frank. If you're going to say that Christianity is proven by martyrdom, Don't you have to say Islam is proven by martyrdom? No. Why? There's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times. But let me just give you one major difference for our purposes. The Muslim martyrs of today haven't witnessed anything to let them know that Islam is true. They just have faith. The New Testament writers, on the other hand, witnessed Jesus rise from the dead. They saw Jesus. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had resurrected from the dead. You see, many people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence than that unless you were there yourself. All right, this last thing I'm going to say is going to annoy some people, especially if you are a believer like I am that the Bible is inerrant. It's going to sound like heresy, but it's not. Stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding called the Bible, we call the Bible, says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. You say, how can that be? Because Christianity did not originate with a book. Christianity originated with an event. Do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Frank, how could you be a Christian without the book of Romans? Was Paul a Christian before he wrote the book of Romans? Of course he was. That's why he wrote the book of Romans. And he wrote it because Jesus appeared to him. Was Matthew a Christian before he wrote the Gospel of Matthew? Of course he was, because Jesus appeared to him. On and on and on. In other words, Christianity didn't originate with a book. It originated with an historical event, the resurrection. There were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written. So we could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. You would not have documents written in the first century in the Holy Land and around the Holy Land by baptized Jews unless Jesus had resurrected from the dead. They wouldn't be writing that Jesus had resurrected from the dead or claimed to be God unless he really did, because they had everything to lose by saying that was true. Now, as I say, there's a lot more evidence. We're just skimming the surface here so you can get the books to figure out more. But let's go through the whole thing real quickly. Does truth exist? Somebody says there's no truth, you're going to say? Is that true? Does God exist? Yeah, we talked about three arguments: cosmological, teleological, moral, and from that we get the attributes of God. We go to the next question: are miracles possible? If God exists, of course they're possible. Has the greatest miracle in the New Testament occurred? That's the resurrection, and we just started to look into the evidence for that. I think it takes more to believe it didn't occur than to believe it did. Now, if you want to go further, the books and the DVDs are back there. These DVDs are 7 hours long, goes through all this material in a lot more detail. Also, we're now teaching online courses. Go to our website, crossexamine.org, and click on the online courses there. We're on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. In fact, this thing is being streamed right now on YouTube and Facebook. Hi, everyone out there. In fact, we're so into YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we've actually combined these three into one social media platform. We call it YouTwitface. It's kind of a Jersey thing. Have you signed up for YouTwitface yet? We're also on Instagram, by the way. The I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast is on. It comes out every Friday or Saturday. Just check it out. It's only 48 minutes long. We're on DirecTV Wednesday nights. There's that word, you text the word evidence to that number again. I'm going to send you this entire PowerPoint presentation and a few other free stuff, a few other free things. And finally, the free Cross-Examined app. If you don't do anything else, go to the App Store and look for Cross-Examined app. It's got the podcast on it. It streams the TV show live. It also has a quick answer section. So you could be having somebody and they say something that you don't know how to answer. You can just say, hey, hang on, I'm getting a text. Hey, what about this? All right? There's answers right in the app. So download the app. 2 words, Cross-Examined. All right, last thing before we get to your questions. It's true. So what? So what if it's true? Well, you know what this means? Someone actually did die for you. Now, when I was in the Navy, I was in naval aviation, so we had to earn wings, which were fairly hard to earn, but there's nothing more difficult in the United States Navy, maybe in any military, to earn than a golden trident. That's what the SEALs earn. Very few people that start SEAL training make it through, maybe 5–10%. Those that do make it through wear that golden trident with pride because it is their identity. It's very hard to earn. When Michael Monsoor was buried in Rosecrans Cemetery in San Diego, California, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they passed his casket, they took off their tridents and they pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and put their identity in the one that sacrificed for them, the one that died for them. And that's what we're supposed to do. We have an identity crisis in America. People are wondering who they are. Our culture says, put your identity in your gender, or put your identity in your sexual orientation, or put your identity in your political party, or your race. There's only one race, the human race. Or put your identity in your ethnic group, or your bank account, or your vocation, or your spouse, or your boyfriend, or your girlfriend. Ladies and gentlemen, none of those things are ultimate. We were designed to put our identity in our Savior. You know, there was a young man who wrote a biography of Jesus we call the Gospel of John. And in the first chapter, he says, God has given you the right to become a child of God. How do you become a child of God? You simply take the identity that He's given you. In Christianity, you don't achieve your identity, you receive your identity. Every other worldview is going to tell you, you have to do something to achieve your identity. Well, you know what that means? It puts all the pressure on you, and it makes you feel inadequate, because there's always somebody that can do it better. And what happens when you put your identity in something that you can no longer do? Do you no longer become a person of value? No, your identity is not achieved. Your identity is received. You just accept it. It's a gift. Why wouldn't you take it? It's free. And He provides the identity by taking your punishment on Himself. And then He rose again to show that He's God, and one day you will rise again as well. By the way, everyone's going to rise again. The only question is where you're ultimately going to wind up. Are you going to be with God? That's heaven. Or are you going to be separated from God? That's hell. It's your call. God's not going to force you into His presence against your will. Unfortunately, many people today are looking for God like a criminal's looking for a cop. Choice is yours. All right, with that, we're going to your questions. And I know you said that this was probably advertised as Q&A, but I've made a decision. We're going to do all Q, no A. All right? So that everyone gets to ask a question, takes all the pressure off me. Now, the great Clint Bolin here has set up a microphone over there. So if you want to ask a question, just get up to the microphone. And since no one likes to ask the first question, we're going to move right on to the second question. Okay, second question. Hey, Joe, did you want, I think this might be the QR code for feedback. If you want to give us some feedback, if you take a picture of that QR code, just take a picture of that QR code, and then the organizers of this will be able to get your insights on how you think this went and what can be improved about it. So. $50 gift card. So take a picture of that, if you would, that QR code, and it's going to bring up a very short survey. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Brad.
Brad. If you can get a little closer to that mic. Go ahead, Brad.
So what does the Bible say about cremation? cremation as an acceptable form of burial?
What does the Bible say about cremation? It doesn't really say anything about it. Now, my co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, many years ago tried to get a book published about cremation, and he couldn't do it, but he had the perfect title. The perfect title was, "Should Christians Make Ashes of Themselves?" He didn't think it would have a big, I guess the publisher didn't think it would have a big readership, right? So the Bible doesn't say anything about it. Now, ultimately, we're going to go to ash anyway, and Christians are going to disagree over this. We bury people in a coffin because we're respecting the body that we know one day will be resurrected, okay? But God can resurrect dust or a body at any point anyway because he's all-powerful. So I think it's really up to the conscience of the person whether or not they want to be cremated or whether or not they want to be buried. Okay. All right? Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Take off the mask if you could. What's your name?
My name is 𝗧𝗕𝗃𝗏.
Get a little closer again.
My name is 𝗧𝗕𝗃𝗏.
Carly?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I don't have a monitor up here, so it might be hard for me to hear. Go ahead, Carly.
I'm not used to the mic reverb.
That's okay. Go ahead.
So earlier on in the speech, you were talking about how, like, the fact that the universe was created and the fact that very specific circumstances
Yes.
for life to be habitable. So over the years, there have been various planets and planetoids that have been discovered that theoretically have the same circumstances or similar circumstances to allow life to live. Do you think, considering that, do you think that there may be a chance of other life in the universe? And if so, do you think...
Is there intelligent life anywhere else in the universe?
And do you think God may have had a hand in that?
Yeah, I'm not so sure there's intelligent life anywhere in the universe. Okay? But...
any other life in general.
Okay, there's a couple of atheists that wrote a book maybe 20 years ago called Rare Earth. Yeah. And they looked into this, given the fine-tuning argument, and they concluded, at least according to them, that it's unlikely there's life elsewhere in the universe, okay? Because there's too many parameters that need to be just right. Is it possible? Of course it's possible. It's a huge place, as we mentioned earlier. But there's a difference between a necessary condition for life and a sufficient condition for life. A necessary condition is you have to have all the attributes that can allow life. You know, you have to have a star or a planet a certain distance from a star. You got to have oxygen, carbon. All these things have to happen in just the right way. But just because you have a planet a certain distance from a star and you have carbon, oxygen, and all the other elements you need for life doesn't mean you're going to have life. It's a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. You have to get life somehow from non-life, and that's the big question nobody knows the answer to from a naturalistic perspective. How did non-living chemicals somehow give rise to life? There is nobody that knows the answer to that, whether they're an atheist or a Christian. Well, Christians are going to say God did it, obviously, because they think it takes a being, a mind like God, to do that. But atheists will admit, even Richard Dawkins, the famous evolutionist atheist, says no one knows how life began, because there's no real way that we know of how natural forces acting on dead matter are going to bring forth a living thing. Life is too complex for that. All right?
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Carly. Yeah, you know, there could be life out there, but from what other people have looked into this, they say it's unlikely. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Ben.
Ben, go ahead, sir.
I've listened to a lot of your videos, Dr. Turek. They're really good. I came here tonight because I was like, holy crap, we're actually having him on campus. So,
did it say that on the flyer?
No, I was surprised.
Holy crap, he's here.
Yeah,
Did
that's
it say
what I
that?
thought.
That'd be pretty good marketing, don't you think?
Yeah, it's very seldom that someone I see on YouTube in real life, you know, so.
All right.
I know that in some of your videos in the past and some of the things I've watched, you talked about objective truth and subjective truth, kind of like what we talked about at the beginning.
Uh-huh.
And kind of some members in my home church and some other people that we talk about, they talk about being progressive Christians.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard of this. So, you know, some people talk about God not being inclusive enough because, you know, you have your inclusivity and diversity and all these other kind of tropes. You you know, they talk about Christ being the only way is not inclusive enough, and that's just one of the many problems, of course, that we have. Aren't there parts of this secular humanism that go directly against the teachings of the Bible? And at what point, if any, does someone get so progressive that they stop being a Christian even if they go to a church?
Well, I'm pretty hard-nosed on this, and let me just give you my assessment of it. I don't think, depending upon what they believe, if they're denying the atonement, which many progressive Christians do, if they're even denying a literal resurrection, if they're denying justification by faith alone, you're no longer a Christian, okay? Because these are some of the essentials of the faith. And they're not progressive because if you're disagreeing with Jesus, you're not progressing, you're regressing. And if you're not agreeing with Jesus, how can you be a Christian? I don't understand why people call themselves Christians and yet disagree with Jesus and his apostles. Let me give you a thought experiment here. Suppose all of us were at the foot of Mount Sinai with Moses as he came down the mountain with the 10 Commandments. We're all Israelites. And Moses says, here are the 10 Commandments from Yahweh. And we look at him and we go, Moses, we don't like those 10. We have our own 10. Should we call ourselves followers of Yahweh?
Nope.
No. If you're going to follow Yahweh and call yourself a Jew, right? If you're a Muslim, you ought to be following Allah. If you're a Buddhist, you ought to be following Buddha. If you're a Christian, you ought to be following yourself.
Nope.
Who should you be following?
You should be following Jesus.
You should be following Jesus. And so, yeah, this has to be a case-by-case basis because you don't know how far somebody has gotten away from the truth. Might we have errors in our own theology that disagree with Jesus and we don't know it? Oh yeah, that could possibly happen. But when you're disagreeing on the fundamentals of the faith, then why call yourself a Christian? Why don't you just call it Ben's church?
Yep.
Right? Or Frank's church. Because the standard isn't God anymore, the standard is you. Does that make sense?
It does.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. All right, anybody else? And by the way, if you have a question, you don't have to wait till the other person sits down, because then we have this awkward thing going on, like, you know, like what are we going to do between now and when the next person gets there? So come on down, Bearcats, because once a Bearcat... Always a Bearcat. Yes, ma'am, what's your name?
My name is Sarah.
Sarah?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Earlier you mentioned that nothing can, or something cannot be created out of nothing. And so...
No, let me say it a different way. I didn't say that something couldn't be created out of nothing. I said that if nothing existed, nothing would still exist.
Yes.
Okay, so if someone exists like God, he can create out of nothing.
Yes. So how would God be able to exist if someone else wasn't there to create him?
Okay, because you're going to get back to an uncreated creator at some point. Let's go back to our original argument about the beginning of the universe. We said if space-time and matter had a beginning, as even atheists are agreeing, then it would seem to me anyway that whatever created space-time and matter must be spaceless, timeless. If you're timeless, do you have a beginning? No. You're eternal. You're outside of time. So the being that created time would seem to be eternal, which means he didn't have a cause himself. So God is the uncaused first cause, the being that had no beginning, the being that had no end. Now, the Bible calls this being the great I am. In fact, Jesus himself referred to himself as I am when he said, before Abraham was born, I am. And the Jews immediately picked up stones to stone him because they knew he was claiming to be God. Now, who is he quoting when he says, before Abraham was born, I am? He's quoting Exodus 3:14, the burning bush. Do you remember when God appeared to Charlton Heston? You remember that? And Moses says to God, I tell the Israelites you are. God, tell them I am sends you. What does I am mean? I am means the self-existent eternal one, the being that didn't have a beginning, the being that won't have an end, the being that just bees, the foundation of everything else that exists. So it's a fair question to ask, who is the uncaused first cause? It's either the universe or something outside the universe. We've already shown that the universe had a beginning, so it must be something outside the universe.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good question, Sarah. Thank you. Yes, the Carolina Panthers from Charlotte, North Carolina, where I live.
I wish.
What's your name?
Logan,
Logan, go ahead.
is Judaism no longer or valid because you cannot go to heaven because of it? Is
It depends on what you mean.
Because you can't go to heaven.
It depends on what you mean by Judaism. Are there things in Judaism that are true? Of course. It's just incomplete if Christianity is true. They're talking about the Messiah coming. Well, the Messiah has come. You see, Christianity fulfills the Jewish covenant, the old covenant. Jesus said, I didn't come to abolish the law, I came to fulfill it. He lived all those 613 laws of the Old Testament. He didn't violate any of them. And that's why he can be our representative. Now, that old covenant is now obsolete, according to the writer of Hebrews. We're not under the old covenant anymore. We're under the new covenant. And Jesus said, I give you one new command, love one another as I have loved you. How did he love us? He sacrificed himself for us. Which goes back to what I said earlier about love does not require approval. In order to love someone, sometimes you have to tell them hard truths, even if they don't like you for that. You're, in a sense, sacrificing something about yourself in order to help them. So Judaism is incomplete. It's true, but it's incomplete. The old covenant has passed, though. Now we're in the new covenant. Does that make sense?
Somewhat. So are you saying that people that follow Judaism now and are not Christians will go to hell because they're not believing in the Messiah, or because they've already used?
No, it's not because they're not believing in the Messiah. People go to hell because they've sinned. Look at it this way. If I die, do I die because I didn't go to the doctor, or did I die because I had a disease? I died because I had a disease. Now, maybe I could have prevented dying by going to the doctor. And the same thing is true when it comes to eternal life. You don't go to hell because you don't believe in Jesus. You go to hell because you've sinned, and you have to pay for your sins, because God is infinitely just, as we saw earlier. He's also infinitely loving, so he's provided a way out. So we're going to be punished because of our sin. Now, we could avoid that punishment if we went to the great doctor, the great physician. Jesus takes our punishment on himself. So people aren't going to hell because they don't believe in Jesus. They're going to hell because they've sinned. And so therefore they have to pay their own punishment. Does that make sense?
Somewhat. Thank you.
Okay. Now, Jesus also said that those who don't have the Son don't have life. Why don't we have life? Because we have to pay the punishment ourselves. Jesus pays it for us. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Antonio.
Antonio, go ahead.
So you were talking about the truth, but you were not talking about the perspectives of the truth. So the grass can be green, right? But it could be yellowish green or green, right? How do I know I am not in a perspective of the truth? Let's say you're a Christian, I'm a Catholic. Why, like a Catholic, I could have the full truth, and as a Christian, I'm going to be in a perspective of the truth?
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question, Antonio, but might it be, are you saying, look, let me put it this way. The truth is out there, right?
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that I know it absolutely. Right. Absolute truth is out there, but I don't know it absolutely. I can apprehend the truth even if I can't completely comprehend the truth. Like we could go to an ocean and stand in front of an ocean and apprehend there's an ocean in front of us, even if we can't completely comprehend everything going on in that ocean.
True.
Okay? So I could be wrong about certain things. You could be wrong about certain things. But thankfully, you don't have to be perfect in order to be saved.
But
you have to know the essentials, and you have to trust in Christ for your salvation, because he's the one that paid for your salvation. Does that make sense?
How do you know you're closer to the truth in the matter of religion?
Right. We try, and that's why we continue to study. That's why we continue to learn. We try and get as close to the truth as we possibly can. Might I be in error on certain things? Certainly I am. And you might be too, right? So that's why we keep trying to learn more. We pray, we study, we meet with others, we try and discover the truth and adhere ourselves to the truth. We're not always successful doing it. But thankfully, you don't have to know everything perfectly. You don't have to be God. None of us are going to be infinite. We just have to know enough and accept enough in order to have our sins forgiven.
Thank you. I have another question.
Yeah.
So, faith. Who gives you faith is God, right?
Say again?
Whenever you have faith, right? Who gives you the faith is God. By the providence of God, you receive faith, right? What about, I don't have a lot of faith, because God is not giving me a lot of faith. How do I pursue my faith when per se I don't have a lot of faith by the grace of God?
Well, what do you mean by the word faith in this context? What do you mean by that?
Believe in.
Okay, trust in. Okay. Well, you have to take a step of trust from belief that to belief in, as we said earlier. Now, you can pray that God would give you, just like Peter and others have said, I think it was Peter who said, help me in my unbelief. Maybe it was Thomas. I can't remember who actually said that. But you still have to make a decision. I don't believe that God gives you saving faith independent of your own free will.
True.
Otherwise, if he did give us saving faith independent of our free will and he wants all to be saved, why isn't everyone saved then?
Then we go to the free will, right?
Right. All right.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Antonio. Katie.
Oh my gosh, you remember my name. That's so cool. So
I wrote it down on your book, so go ahead.
So I'm a marine biology and wildlife conservation student, and so that means I take a ton of science courses here at the university, genetics and geology type stuff and ecology, and so there have been a couple instances where I've had difficulty rectifying what I read in the Bible versus what I'm taught in class. So like, for example, when I was teaching youth group in Skidmore last week, we were talking about Noah's Ark and the flood, and Jack Whelan, my preacher, he mentioned that there was a sphere of water around the earth, whereas like when I've been taught geological timescale and science and stuff, I've never heard anything like that, and it was really hard for me to rectify. What advice do you have for me when in regards to the science that I have to do for school and for my job versus what I read in the Bible?
As I said earlier, science doesn't say anything scientists do. There are many different theories about many different things. First of all, you have to try and discover what the text in the Bible says. Is this a literal text? Is this an allegorical text? What is the purpose of the text? What would the people who this was written to, what would they have thought about it, right? And then you have to look at the scientific theory and try and discover, is the data good? Is it being interpreted properly? And there are always assumptions that go into that, and there's always assumptions that go into this as well. So you just have to make your best judgment. Let me give you an example of Genesis 1, right? People are always saying, what about Genesis 1? What's the kind of literature in Genesis 1? Well, to me, it certainly seems like it's an historical account told in a poetic way, right? You've got 3 days that have certain characteristics, and they conform to the next 3 days. And God said starts every phrase, and God saw it was good, ends every day, I should say. And day 1 and day 4 are congruent, day 2 and day 5, and day 3 and day 6. And so there's a rhythm there. And it seems that Genesis 1 is a polemic against the Egyptian creation account. Who was Genesis 1 written by? Moses. When? Right after they came out of Egypt. Now, these people who are coming out of Egypt are not walking through the desert asking questions we might ask, like, I wonder how old this place is. You know, I wonder if creation or evolution is true or anything. They're not asking those questions. What they want to know is, who is the true God? Is it the Egyptian gods, or is it Yahweh? And if you look at an Egyptian creation account, somehow there are beings who either are self-created or already exist in the universe, and they somehow bring order to the chaos. Moses comes along and says, no, God is outside the universe. He created everything, and he brings order from the chaos. And so, depending on how literally you're going to take that passage, might either cause you problems or not problems when you're trying to look at scientific data, which also makes assumptions that can't always be proven.
So do you think that I should keep the scientific data that I use in school and work and everything separate from my biblical belief? Or do
No.
you think it's okay to intertwine
No,
them?
you should integrate them and know that there are areas that you might not be able to figure out. Okay? Because again, science doesn't say anything scientists do. Science, by definition, is tentative. In fact, I know you can't always trust Wikipedia, but I want you to go look up a Wikipedia page that says overturn scientific theories. You will find that there are dozens of overturned scientific theories over the centuries. In fact, the Big Bang might someday be overturned. But thankfully, even if it is overturned, I think we have good evidence that the universe had a beginning. Why? Just from philosophy. Let me give you this very briefly. How do we know time had a beginning? Well, because if there were an infinite number of days before today, this day never would have arrived, right? Why? Because if there's an infinite number of days before today, you'd always have to live another day before you got to today. But today is here. That means there can only be a finite number of days before today, which means time had a beginning. And if time had a beginning, space and matter did too. So time had a beginning, so there was a beginning regardless of what the Big Bang data say.
Thank you so much,
All right.
Frank.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, come as close to the microphone as you can. Yeah. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hey, what's your name?
Trey.
Say Trey. Go ahead, Trey.
Sorry if this comes out a bit garbled. I'm not a speaker.
No, I can hear you fine. Go ahead.
I'm talking about like putting sentences together. Okay. Now, we've sort of established that God does exist, and that means miracles are possible with the Bible and Old and New Testament. And well, it was one of the points where he established like even at this very moment that God is still sustaining all things. Sort of my question is like what does the fact that God is continuing to sustain all things, even to this very moment, sort of intertwine with the fact that miracles are possible? Like, are miracles still happening today, or if they are like, well, usually why don't you hear about them more when they happen?
Okay, well, that's a good question, Trey. There's a book written by a brilliant scholar from Asbury Seminary. His name is Craig Keener, and he's written a hernia-inducing 2-volume set on modern-day miracles. It's called Miracles. Lee Strobel has also written a book, a simpler book called The Case for Miracles, and they're talking about modern-day miracles, not miracles just way back in New Testament times. But let me say this. There do not need to be any miracles since Jesus and the apostles for Christianity to be true. Mm-hmm. Now, I think there have been miracles, and they do occur today. There's too much evidence they do. But I think there's a difference between the fact of miracles and the gift of miracles. What do I mean by that? I think that the early apostles had the gift of miracles. They could heal people on command to prove to people that they were apostles of God and people should listen to them, right? I don't think anybody has the gift of, say, healing today. Because if they did, they would be emptying hospitals. But they're not, okay? Now, can God heal somebody through an individual? They can, but that's up to God. They don't have the gift themselves, is what I'm saying. It seems to me. Again, I think miracles occur today, but the miracles aren't affirming the person as a special representative of God like the miracles did in New Testament times for Paul and Peter and the other apostles. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you were going to say you were a miracle. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I think just about this time last year, when I was in a very bad spot, it just so happened that I had every single thing I needed to recover and improve.
All right. Amen to that, Trey. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Carly, I came up here earlier.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Carly. Yeah.
Literally, as I sat down, I came up with another question.
Yeah, get closer to the mic. You got to be right in front of that mic.
Literally, as I sat down, I came up with another question and was just psyching myself up to come back
All
up
right,
again.
go ahead.
So I'm a writing major, and I've been taking a class.
You're what major?
Writing.
Writing, okay.
Yeah. So I've been taking a class called Writing and Rhetoric, and I've been learning about just writing through history, rhetoric through history, and one of the I'll keep this brief, but one of the concepts I learned from one of the rhetoricians we studied was the idea of two people, or two groups of people, doing completely different things for the same reason, whether it be morally, or any other reason. So for example, two groups of people honoring the dead in two completely different ways, one person burying them, one person
cremating them.
And then there were even people historically who ate the bodies as a way of returning the knowledge that the person had gained throughout life back to the people, and then to not waste anything. And all the ways were seen as a way of honoring the dead. And the idea was that if these groups of people were doing the exact same, doing completely different things for the exact same reason, how can you ethically say that any one person is wrong? How can you say that there is one truth if all of them are true to them? So I wanted to hear your opinion on that.
Well, this is typically done sometimes in a class where the professor is trying to get people to believe that certain practices or that morality is relative. And it's normally done with, say, the life raft example, where someone will say, the professor will say, okay, you've been shipwrecked and you've got a life raft for 3 people, but 4 people are on the life raft. Unless you throw somebody off, everyone's going to die. So what do you do? Okay, break up in groups and discuss. And then they break up in groups and discuss, and they all come back and come up with different solutions. And the professor says, see, morality is relative. But that doesn't prove morality is relative. It actually proves the opposite. Because there would be no moral dilemma unless life was valuable, right? If life wasn't valuable, you'd say, who cares? Throw everybody off. There's no dilemma here. The very reason there's a dilemma and you can't figure out the right thing to do is because you know how valuable life is. And so just because there are some hard problems in morality, that doesn't mean there aren't easy problems in morality, right? Torturing babies for fun is not a hard problem. We don't do it. Murdering innocent people is not a hard problem. We don't do it. A scenario you gave might be a hard problem. We can't figure out necessarily what the right thing to do is. But just because we can't figure out what the right thing to do is doesn't mean there isn't a right thing to do.
So, thank you for acknowledging. So, in this scenario, the idea behind it was that each answer was the right answer.
According to what standard, though?
By each culture's standard.
Well,
because when asked whether they would give up anything if...
Okay, but here's this is an ends and means issue then.
Yeah.
Because what everybody agrees on is we ought to honor the dead, right? Yeah. That's the moral absolute. That's the end. The means on how you honor the dead is relative. So maybe people honor the dead by burying them. Many people honor the dead by cremating them. I don't know about eating them. I don't know where that came from. Okay, I would say that's off limits for anybody.
Well,
but
that would take too long to explain.
Yeah, but do you see the moral absolute here, though, Carly? The moral absolute is that you ought to honor the dead, right? We have this in greetings, right? Yeah. Some people greet with a hug, some with a handshake, some, as the scripture says, with a holy kiss. What's absolute that you ought to greet people? How you greet them, it's culturally relative. But there's still an absolute in there. All right?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, ma'am, what's your name?
Emma.
Hey, Emma, go ahead.
So I was wondering, do you think that you can believe in the Word of God and what the Bible teaches and also believe in evolution?
Yes, because it depends on how you interpret Genesis 1. And there are Christians, in fact, Francis Collins, who is the head of the, or I don't know if he's still the head, he may have just resigned, of NIH, National Institutes of Health. He's a very strong Christian, and he believes in evolution, okay? I don't think he's right about that. I mean, I agree that microevolution has occurred, but I think there's too many problems with macroevolution to think it's true, not from a biblical perspective, but just from a scientific perspective. I don't think the evidence is there for it, okay? So, yeah, you can believe it, but I would ask people, what evidence do you have for it, and why do you think it's true? All right?
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hi, my name is Joe.
Jeff, go ahead. Hey, is this like a youth group all leaving at once? What, you guys can't stay 4 hours? What kind of commitment is that? Yes, thanks for coming. Hey, once a bear cat?
Always a bear cat.
All right. Sorry, go ahead.
Anyways, so my question is kind of around free will. So
kind of around what?
Is around free will.
Free will. Yeah.
So I was listening to one of the more prominent atheists out there named Sam Harris once.
Yes.
And he said something along the lines of, like, without free will, Christianity and like all these religions, like, they really just cannot make sense or anything. So I'm just kind of wondering, you know, do you think can Christianity, like, does Christianity kind of need like free will to kind of just like to make sense of like the world around us?
I think so, and I don't know if you know this about Sam Harris, but he doesn't think we have free will.
No, he doesn't.
And so my question for him is, did he freely come to that conclusion? Because if he didn't freely come to that conclusion, why should we believe it's true? Right? You see, to say you don't have free will implies you do. Otherwise, you're not really coming to a conclusion based on reason. You're just saying what physics is telling you to say, which isn't free.
Okay, so like, so you believe that like God gave human beings free will, like the ability to choose and make decisions and everything?
Yes.
Could you also like believe that everything could be pre-planned maybe by God?
Sure, it can still be pre-planned and we can still be free.
Yeah.
Why? Because since God is outside of time, he knows the end from the beginning. He knows what's going to happen before we do it. But that doesn't mean that we're not freely doing it. Since God is all-knowing, he knew when he created this universe, when he elected to create this universe, he knew how it would turn out. But we're still freely doing what he knew we would do. Because knowing something's going to happen doesn't necessarily imply causing it to happen. Let me give you an illustration of this. Let's suppose a young mother brings her baby home from the hospital after the baby's born, and she puts the baby down one night. She knows at some point during the night that baby's going to wake up to want to eat, right? Mm-hmm. But because she knows that, is she causing that to happen? No. Just knowing something is going to happen doesn't imply causing it. So God knows what we're going to do, but we're still freely doing it. That's why my co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, many years ago wrote a book called Chosen But Free. God chooses us when he elects this universe, but we're freely doing what we do.
Okay, I have one more if that's all right.
Sure. Is this freely? Or is this, do you have free will doing this, or?
I believe with the power of God that I do have the free
will
to come up here. Yes. Anyways. This is the ontological argument.
Mm-hmm.
This is like a very philosophical argument where, you know, just like thinking about like we already know the existence of God. I think the argument goes along the lines of like once we're able to grasp, God does exist by just merely thinking about him. And once we are able to intellectually grasp the concept of God, he just therefore exists. Like, I was kind of curious, like, could you maybe give like a
I do not use the ontological argument because I think it's too controversial. Why use controversial arguments when you have arguments that seem much more intuitive, like the cosmological argument or the teleological argument? But if you want a good place to go to see a good presentation of the ontological argument, go to William Lane Craig's YouTube channel. And he's got all little short animated videos on all the arguments for God, major arguments for God. One of them is the ontological argument. So take a look at that and see what you think.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name's also Joe.
Hey, Joe. You're Big Joe.
Yeah, Big Joe. That's actually my buddy.
All right.
So my question refers to, we've talked about progressive Christians, we've talked about tolerance and the difference between intolerance and love.
Mm-hmm.
How in this society where we have an identity crisis, as you talked about, do we approach non-Christians where we want them to listen to our views from that perspective of love and not coming off as intolerant towards them?
I would ask the first question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Ask them. Or if Jesus rose from the dead, would you, to prove he was God, would you follow him? And see what they say. Because they may have some baggage with Christianity, so just talk about Jesus. Everybody loves Jesus. If Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God, would you follow him? And see what they say. Because there's no sense talking to people if they're not open. If they are open, then you can make some progress. And I think the best way to talk about people is to ask questions rather than make statements. So my friend Greg Koukl has written a great book called Tactics, and I know some of you have studied it, because Greg says, instead of making statements, ask questions. You might ask them a question, what do you believe, and then why? Or, what do you mean by that? Like, for example, let's take an objection you might get to Christianity. Someone might say, well, I can't believe the Bible because it's been changed throughout the centuries. Don't go into a dissertation as to why it hasn't been changed throughout the centuries. Say, what do you mean by that? What do you mean it's been changed throughout the centuries? And see what they say. Because they may think the Bible was like the telephone game. You know, it started here and it got passed all the way over, and by the time it got to the person at the end of the row, it was all garbled. That's not how we got the Bible, but they may think that. Next question, after you ask what do you mean by that, is how did you come to that conclusion? What evidence do you have for that position? If you want to customize that question for this particular topic, you might say, how did you come to that conclusion? Have you investigated the manuscript evidence for yourself? I guarantee you no one's going to say, yeah, just last night I was up reading a book about the Byzantine line of manuscripts. Nobody's going to say that. Most people believe what they believe based on slogans they've heard. They don't even know what the slogan really means, but it sounds good to them, and as soon as you ask them for evidence for the slogan, they're out of intellectual justification for the slogan. So ask, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion, or what evidence do you have for that position? The final question is a nice way of you providing evidence back. Have you ever considered that we didn't get the Bible like the telephone game? The Bible was written down by eyewitnesses or people who knew eyewitnesses, and we have so many copies of what they wrote down, we can reconstruct the original with more than 99.5% accuracy, and even a skeptic like Bart Ehrman would agree with that, okay? So those questions I think you ought to use. Just ask people questions. Get to know them as a person. And then, after they have told you what they believe, then you might be able to share some things that you believe. But take an interest in people rather than just trying to make them a project, right? Mm-hmm. By the way, these questions are in our app, the Cross-Examined app, 2 words in the App Store. And you can use them for anything. Ladies and gentlemen, these questions aren't just for Christianity. Parents, if your teenage son calls you one night and says, Dad, I'm not going to be home by 11 like you wanted me to, don't panic. First question, what do you mean by that? Second question, how'd you come to that conclusion? Right? Third question, have you ever considered if you're not home by 11, you're grounded for 2 weeks? Right. Be right home, Dad. All right? Now, husbands, never, ever, ever use these questions on your wives. Because if your wife calls you an idiot, don't say, what do you mean by that? Right? How'd you come to that conclusion? Right? In my case, she has a list 37 years long, right? And I'm toast. So ask questions. I think that's the way to do it.
Thank you, Frank.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Joe. Yes, sir, what's your name?
Hello, Dr. Turek. My name is Dalton.
Dalton, you're ready for radio, man. That was good. That was powerful. Go ahead.
So I'm a Christian, and I know some close family, close friends. They claim to be atheists for this specific reason. They've had damaging relationships with other friends or family that have called themselves Christians, but still showing them negligible or abusive behaviors that are un-Christ-like. Now, Christianity, it's a lot about fellowship and love, watching out for others and showing them what Jesus did. So my big question to you is, how can I approach these friends and family of mine that just have wanted to run away from Christianity because of these stereotypes that have been put up by just angry people who don't quite live up to the truth that Christianity is about? How do I show them that love, and try to preach the gospel to them and show love for them without just perpetuating that stereotype.
All right, I would ask them this question. What's your favorite band, musical group? So ask them the question, right? Now suppose you went into a bar or a wedding or somewhere where a band was playing, right? It wasn't your favorite band, but it was a band that was trying to play your favorite band songs, and they were playing them poorly. Who would you blame? Would you blame the band that's playing it poorly, or the band that wrote the song and performed it well?
Probably the band playing it.
Poorly, right?
Yeah.
Well, the same thing is true with Christianity. Don't blame Jesus for people that don't emulate him well. Because people don't emulate him well, that doesn't change the fact that Jesus is God and our Savior. So, when people emulate your favorite band poorly, you don't blame your favorite band. You blame the copy band. So don't blame bad Christians for Christianity.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Dalton.
Hello.
Hey.
Am I close enough?
Is this Elle?
Yeah.
Hey, Elle.
Hello.
How are you?
Oh. I'm too short. So you've proved that the New Testament is true, but this is our version. This is the one main Christian Bible that's used. Lots of other Orthodox religions use different Bibles. Some of them have Enoch, the book of Enoch in it. Mm-hmm. And so there are also, like, the Catholic Bible has a bunch of different extra books that our Christian Bible doesn't have. So about the selections of those books, if those don't agree with your New Testament, how do you know that all the books in the New Testament were just filtered out to make them seem like
well, that's
what
easy.
those
I'm
men
right.
wanted? Yeah, you're right. But why? But why?
Actually, the major groups of Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
Roman Catholicism, Protestants, Greek Orthodox, all have the same New Testament. Okay? The Old Testament is disputed. Some books have been added to the Old Testament by the Roman Catholic Church in the Council of Trent, which began in 1545. And as I understand the history, this was largely in a result to Luther, the Reformation, which took place a couple of decades before that, because the Catholic Church was talking about praying for the dead. And Luther says, where's praying for the dead? Well, it's in 2nd Maccabees. Well, 2nd Maccabees isn't in the Old Testament. Well, it is now.
And even
Right.
in I don't remember what chapter it is, but our Bible says not to pray for the dead, let the dead bury their own dead.
Yes.
So it would contradict.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would disprove that form of Christianity.
Yeah, it would prove, if that's true, it would show that, okay, 1st and 2nd Maccabees may have some good historical information in it, and it does, but it's not an inspired text. Neither is the book of Enoch. Neither is the book of Wisdom and Tobit and some of these other books and a few chapters that are added to Daniel, for example, in the Catholic Old Testament. Now, the reason I think the Protestants are right about this, because, I went to Catholic high school, I was Catholic, and it's not just now because I'm a Protestant and I think my team is right, is because I don't think that the Jews had these books in their Old Testament. So if we're not going to if the Jews don't put them in their Old Testament, why would we put them in ours? Okay? Now, let's just say that there's a dispute there and we don't know who's right. Does it change our theology dramatically because there are extra books in the Old Testament? No. It doesn't change our theology dramatically. It's serious when we're altering the Word of God inappropriately, but the Old Covenant is now obsolete, according to the writer of Hebrews. The Old Covenant is not bearing on Christians anymore. Okay? The New Covenant is. So the New Testament is our marching orders. Not that the Old Testament isn't important. We learn a lot about God from the Old Testament, but it's not like the New Testament. So even though we may have differences on these issues, they're not major issues that strike at the heart of Christianity.
Okay,
All right?
thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Elle.
I'll let you do it.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
I'd prefer not to say.
You prefer not to say? That's a long name, man.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
So where do you stand on the age of accountability, the idea that if someone does not have the opportunity to hear the word of God, they are unable to, in sense, believe the word of God and be saved?
You could ask the question, are infants saved or not before the age of accountability? I think the age of accountability is mentioned in Isaiah chapter 8, before the young lad knows his right hand from his left, the good from the bad. So it applies an age of accountability. Now, what was the age of accountability in David's day or Isaiah's day? I don't know, maybe 7, maybe 8. What is it now? Maybe 37, maybe 38? I don't know. And, well, it's 37 or 38 for men, about 14 for women, all right? But I think there's two possibilities here. That God would know what the person would have done if that person had lived longer, or God takes the people before the age of accountability with him to heaven, and the scripture we have for that is David's baby. After David's baby dies, he's mourning while the baby's sick. As soon as he dies, he stops mourning. His assistants say, "King, you were mourning before the baby died, and now the baby's dead, and now you're not mourning anymore. Why?" And David said, "I will go to him, he will not come to me." Implying that he's going to see his son again in the afterlife. Whatever happens in the afterlife, we know since God is just, no one is going to get a raw deal. Right? And since God wants people to be saved more than we do, then certainly no one is going to go to hell who should go to heaven or who wanted to go to heaven. So we just trust in the love and justice of God.
Okay.
All right? Thank you. Yes, sir. Yeah, you can just hand it to him. Go ahead, sir. What's your name?
Jared.
Jared. You're definitely ready for radio, man. That was good.
Thank you. I've been told I've had a wild voice.
That's
I
it.
said I don't need a microphone. but anyway, my question is, one of the most common questions that I'm asked is, they say, "Jared, you're a Christian, but you of all people, being through what you've been through, being in your situation, how can you justify that?" And I say, well, first of all, I don't believe that my disability was caused by God. It was caused because God created me, I believe, the way I was supposed to, and it was human error. At some point after that point. So I just say God is going to reward me for my infinite loyalty, which I'm a very loyal person to God and those important to me anyway. And I just thought of this. I guess my question is, with your PhD doctoral degree, and I'm very impressed, by the way. Do you have any advice on how to better articulate that answer?
Yeah, and if you come to the book table, I'm going to give you a book, Jared, on it.
Thank you.
Okay? Yeah, I think that, first of all, when people are claiming that things are wrong with the world, we agree with them, right? But things can only be wrong with the world if it should be another way. And the only way it should be another way, if there's a being outside of us whose nature would dictate the way it should be. Otherwise, it would just be that skeptic's opinion that, Jared, this disability you have, you should not have, right? Okay. Like, go back to what we talked about earlier about football. Unless you know the purpose of the game, you can't say whether one play is getting you closer, one play is a good play, or another play is a bad play. You need to know the purpose, right? Now, what is the purpose of life? The purpose of life isn't necessarily to have no disability. The purpose of life is to know God and to make him known. Jesus says this through when he's praying on our behalf to the Father in the high priestly prayer in John 17. He says, "Now this is eternal life, that they," meaning us, because he's praying for us, the believers, "that they may know God the Father and Jesus Christ whom you sent." Notice that Jesus doesn't say eternal life is endless time. He says Jesus says eternal life is not a quantity, it's a quality. To know God and to make Him known. Sometimes you can only know God when you go through difficulty. In fact, most of the time, I think, we know God better when we go through difficulty.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you, given your disability, probably know God better than most of us in here.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. In fact, I'll just give you a quick example of this. William Lane Craig, you may or may not know, is a very astute apologist for the Christian faith, debated many people. And years ago, he had some sort of disease which began to deform his limbs. He still has it to this day. And he got that as a very young man, and he kept asking God, why would you allow this to happen to me? And then he finally realized that that disability propelled him into academia, away from sports. And now the impact that he's had on the world and Christianity is so much greater because of his disability. If he hadn't had his disability, he may not have taken the path that he took.
Wow.
So sometimes going through difficulty, in fact, most times going through difficulty will bring you closer to God than otherwise. In fact, as you know, Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 4, he says, our light and momentary afflictions are achieving for us a greater weight of glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, for what is seen is temporary. We fix our eyes on what is unseen, for what is unseen is eternal. And you are right, if you read Hebrews 11, God talks about people experiencing a more difficult martyrdom so they should have a better resurrection. And when you go through difficulty here, you're enhancing your capacity to enjoy God not only now but in eternity. And you will be recompensed for the difficulty that you experienced here.
Wonderful. Thank you for your insight.
Yes, sir. Now, if you have to leave, the book on the table, just tell Shelley or Amy back there to give you the book Stealing from God.
Okay, thank you.
All right? Thanks, brother.
Okay.
Thank you for being here.
Good.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's John.
Hey, John.
My only question to you is a very personal question to you specifically, and my question is like two parts. One, do you pray daily, and what does your prayer life look like?
That's a hard question, because my prayer life should be better than it is, but I do pray daily, and I'm more of a doer than I'm always on the go. So a lot of times I'm just praying as I'm driving. I turn off the radio or whatever, or the podcast. We always pray over meals. I normally pray a little bit in the morning, and I think any honest Christian, unless you're James the Just, who was Jesus' brother, whose knees were so worn out from praying, most Christians will say prayer is hard. It is. And so it can be difficult. When I really want to get into it, though, I think the Psalms are the best place to go for prayers, because that's what they are. You know, most of the Bible is God talking to us. The Psalms are us talking to God. Mm-hmm. So, but prayer is hard, I will admit.
Thank you.
Yes. What was there a second part to that, John?
It was just like, do you pray daily? And
what does it
look like
all
to
right.
you and you?
We ought to pray more. All of us ought to pray more.
Okay.
All right. In fact, for you parents out there, my co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, had 6 kids. And I said, what advice do you have when the kids get older? Yes. And what he said was, talk less, pray more. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Grace, and my question is that as a Christian, when you're striving towards the truth and actively pursuing it through prayer and purposefully trying to dive deeper into His Word through Bible study and just trying to lean more into the Lord, do you think that Christians who are doing God's work get more obstacles put in their path purposefully to prohibit them or try to discourage them from doing God's work?
That people are trying to do God's work, obstacles put in their way by God so they don't do God's work? Is that what you said?
No, evil sees that and tries to counteract it.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
As my mentor, Dr. Norman Geisler, used to say, I'm an eternal optimist. If things are going well, God's blessing me. If things aren't going well, Satan's after me because I'm about to do good stuff. Right? Look, God does discipline those he loves. That's Hebrews 12. Does Satan attack people or demons attack people who are trying to do well, trying to do good? Yeah, I think he does. Now, can we always trace this? No, there's a complete unseen realm there. We know that it happens, but we don't always know how it happens. So our purpose is to stay focused on Jesus and to ask him for any help that we need as we go through difficulty. So trying to figure out how this has happened isn't always fruitful, but that it's happening is pretty apparent. In fact, I think if you look around the world, you realize that the kind of evil that is done can't just be explained by human beings looking out for themselves. There's so much gratuitous evil out there that people actually get a charge out of going beyond what's necessary to get an advantage. It's as if someone is urging us on to do more evil. So, yeah, there's a whole unseen spiritual realm that we need to be aware of. And just read Paul in Ephesians chapter 6 to get ready for that.
Thank you. That was super helpful.
Thank you, Grace. Yes, sir.
My name's Micah.
Hey, Micah.
My question is, can you respond to the puddle argument? Puddle wakes up one day and it says, wow, the chances that I would be exactly this way are 1 in a billion. I must be designed. How does that not apply to the universe?
Well, because there are too many parameters. Knowing that, let me change the illustration a little bit from the puddle analogy. Because what the puddle analogy, as I understand it, is saying is that that knowing that things are just the way they are kind of answers the fact that they are just the way they are, which isn't the point. It was an illustration that philosopher John Leslie gave, and it's this. Imagine you're put forth a firing squad on trumped-up charges, and they're ready. There's 100 trained marksmen on you, and they all look at you, and you hear, ready, aim, fire, and you hear the guns, and then you realize you're not dead. Now, because you realize you're not dead, does that explain why you're not dead? No. Obviously, you have to be alive to know you're alive, but that doesn't explain why you're alive. What you figure out later is, okay, maybe this was a big hoax and they had put blanks in the guns or something. You know that 100 trained marksmen didn't all miss by chance. There was a purpose. There was a design behind it. And the same thing is true with this universe. There's a design behind it. First of all, a puddle, if you really want to dive into it, is pretty complex in the sense that water is something that needs to be explained. Where does water come from? Right? You know, water is something that needs to be explained itself. And a puddle can be any particular size, but the universe can't be any just particular size or have any particular parameters. It's got to have very, very specific parameters for us to exist at all. So you can have large puddle, small puddle, not with regard to the universe. You've got to have a dozen or so parameters that are tuned to incomprehensible levels, like 1 in 10 to the 40 we talked about earlier. Or the cosmological constant, which drives the expansion rate of the universe, is fine-tuned to 1 in 10 to the 120th power. There's only like 10 to the 80 atoms in the entire universe. And the difference between 10 to the 80 and 10 to the 81 is 10. 10 to the 81 is 10 times bigger than 10 to the 80. Well, this is 10 to the 120th power. You can't even comprehend that. So no, the puddle analogy doesn't work.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Micah. All right, here is our last question. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Alex.
Alex.
Okay, thank you. How do you approach New Age spirituality and manifestation crystals, those types of things? Obviously, I know you said ask questions to those people who are wrapped up in those things, but what's your view overall on the New Age spirituality?
Well, we have an apologist that works with us a little bit. Her name is Melissa Doherty. And if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll see some of her videos there. She came out of the New Age, became a Christian. And so the best thing to do is to see some of her videos because she can give you some questions to ask and some insights you can have. But let me give you my own experience on this. I was in Dallas, Texas, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. And we were at the book table. And somebody came up to the book table and said, "Do you have any books on Buddhism?" And I said, "Why?" And the lady said, "Well, because my friend just became a Buddhist." And I said, "Did your friend used to be a Christian?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Look, I don't know your friend at all, but let me ask you a question. Did your friend, when she was a Christian, begin to do something that Jesus, the apostles, the scriptures would prohibit?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "You don't need a book on Buddhism. She's not a Buddhist because she thinks it's true. I think she's a Buddhist because she wants to be spiritual without moral accountability." Right? That's the real reason. It's not like she decided, oh, Buddhism's true. She just decided she didn't want Christianity anymore because Christianity would prevent her from doing what she wanted to do. So, okay, I don't want the moral accountability anymore, but I still want to be spiritual. So I don't know if that's a situation with the person you're thinking of right now, but it might be. That's why you might want to ask, if Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God, would you follow him? Thanks, Alex. All right, I thought it was the last question, but it's not. Sorry. Yes, sir, go ahead. Yeah.
Hey, Frank.
Hey.
My name's Brody.
What's your name?
Brody.
Brody, go ahead, sir.
I have two questions. The first one would be, what are some inspirational leaders in the Christian faith that you've learned from? And then what would be your best advice to a fellow believer?
What's the second one?
What would be your best advice to a fellow believer?
Oh, wow, that's huge. Whew. All right, the first one, the people that I learned from a theological perspective, of course I don't agree with anyone on everything, but Tim Keller, I don't know if you know who Tim Keller is. Tim Keller was the pastor of Redeemer Church in New York City, retired. Now has pancreatic cancer. You may want to pray for him. So I listen to a lot of Tim Keller sermons for theology. He does a great job with the scriptures. My friend Jack Hibbs out in California is quite good. My friend Andy Stanley down in Georgia is quite good. Is a really good communicator. For apologetics, you can't get any better than C.S. Lewis. Norman Geisler, who I learned quite a bit from, as you know. Greg Kokel has great stuff. Stephen Meyer on the whole evolution thing is very good. J. Warner Wallace, my friend, the cold case homicide detective I told you about earlier, is very good. William Lane Craig, who I've been mentioning, has great stuff. So these are the kind of people that I try and learn from. John Lennox, do you know who John Lennox is? John Lennox is a wonderful guy. In fact, I'm going to have him on the podcast next week. John Lennox is just a wonderful Oxford professor who's now 78 years old, and just, if everyone was like John Lennox, the whole world would be Christianized by now. These are all wonderful people. Advice, wow, to a believer. Couple things. Keep an eternal perspective, right? There's a lot of things that happen that don't make sense temporally, but they do eternally. And we have to keep an eternal perspective because we don't end when this life ends. And I would also say stay focused on the essentials. Don't get bogged down in disputes that don't really matter to the ultimate point. Focus on why the gospel is true and focus, therefore, on getting the gospel to everyone. Stay on the essentials. You want to argue how old the universe is? Be my guest. You want to argue eschatology? Be my guest. You want to argue about, mode of baptism? Be my guest. I'm not interested. I mean, I'm interested in the topics, but I'm not going to divide over those issues. Stay on the big issues.
Thanks.
All right, thanks. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Macy.
Hey, Macy.
Okay. I have, thank you, two things. To the praise of God, you came here like 4 years ago, I think.
Yes, ma'am.
I was in a really dark spot, and I asked you questions, and you said that the Lord was going to display his grace and glory in me, and I can say that he has done that, and he has freed me from a lot of darkness and a lot of things. So praise the Lord for that.
Amen to that.
Testimony.
Thanks, Macy.
But the second thing, and this might be out of the norm of what you're used to, but my question is if I can pray for our campus and for you as you go to other campuses, just because I've been in the college realm for going on 7 years now, and I just have seen that this is one of the most pivotal moments for people my age, as far as darkness and light.
Yes.
So would you mind if I prayed for you in our campus, or are you
Oh, please
planning on
do.
that? Okay.
Yeah.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for your goodness, your sovereignty, your mercy. Thank you for making us, choosing us, loving us, calling us. Father, I just ask that your power would be displayed on this campus, that if you're calling anyone here tonight to know you, to put their trust in your Son, that they would do that they would find someone on campus to talk to about it, that they would get plugged into a church. I pray for Frank that you would just continue to use him in his ministry, that he would just spread the gospel, that he would tear down strongholds by your word and by your truth, and that light would just be displayed on college campuses. We love you, Lord, and we wait for you to come back. In your name I pray. Amen.
Thank you. Hey, that's it. What a way to end. Thanks to the folks out there. God bless you guys. Thanks for being out here.